Chris, aka Wapcaplets from the X Factor podcast. I know the games of X-Wing that I play, find that I'm often having to look in the rule book what the rules are for moving through obstacles. So I wanted to record the session so that I have a visual reminder for myself and hopefully help people out there that may be uncertain about the same things that I am about these rules. So you can find the rules for moving through obstacles, and obstacles is the generic term. The obstacle that we see most often so far in X-Wing is the dread asteroid. And what the rules for moving through obstacles boil down to are that if your movement template overlaps an asteroid, or if your base at the end of its maneuver overlaps an asteroid, what you do is, number one, skip your action for that ship for that turn, so that ship will not get action the turn that it overlaps an asteroid. And you also have to roll a red die and suffer the results of that red die. So if you roll a hit or a crit, you're taking damage or removing shield tokens. And if you have no shield tokens and you roll a crit, you suffer a crit as normal. So for like TIE fighters that have no shields, it can be a very dangerous thing to collide with asteroids. And final thing that you need to remember about moving through asteroids is that if at the end of your maneuver, your ship base is overlaying any part of the asteroid, so if you're sitting on top of it, you cannot shoot. So you really avoid that, because that means you can't do anything on that turn. So what I've got up here in Vassal are 5 different scenarios that we're going to go through. Got 5 different TIE fighters, and they're each going to move forward straight 3, and we're going to see what happens as they maneuver around these asteroids. So, Hal Runner. And if you're Star Wars lore, Hal Runner is a female pilot, so she's going to go and move straight 3. Now, she's pretty close to this asteroid, but her maneuver template is not overlapping it. And at the end of her maneuver, she's not overlapping any part of the asteroid. So it's almost like this asteroid isn't here, because her template didn't move through it, and base didn't wind up on top of the asteroid. She can take action and she can shoot. She suffers no ill consequences. So even though if we set her along, her bases overlap, that isn't particularly relevant, because it only matters where you wind up at the end of your maneuver. So bear in mind when you're doing maneuvers that are close to asteroids. It only matters if your template overlaps or if your base is on top at the end of the maneuver. So we're going to go to example number 2, Mothel. So his template is clearly overlapping the asteroid, so he maneuver around it quite as deftly as Hal Runner did. So, and of his maneuver, he's fortunately not going to be over the asteroid with his base, so he can still shoot, but will lose his action because his template overlapped part of the asteroid. He'll have to roll a red die, and if he rolls a hit or a crit, he's going to suffer that. Number 3, we're going to do the Dark Curse. So things going from bad to worse. This is when Dark Curse, and I'm just going to move the template slightly so we get the red outline to see where it ends. Dark is going to enter here. He did his maneuver with his base on the asteroid, so he have to roll a red die to see if he suffers any damage, and he's also not going to be able to shoot this turn because his base is physically on top of the asteroid. So this is a thing to do. But we're going to see in our next example, it can get even worse. Slide over. Next, we have Backstabber. So Backstabber, like our other TIE fighters, is going to move forward 3. This template doesn't overlap any part of the asteroid, but when he finishes his maneuver, he's going to be overlapping the asteroid. Now, Dark Curse, he's going to have to roll a red die because his base is overlapping. And for the consequences, he's also not going to be able to shoot this turn because he's overlapping the asteroid. But what's particularly bad for Backstabber is because this big portion of the asteroid is still in front of him, the next turn when he places his maneuver template, no matter which maneuver he does, his maneuver template is going to be overlapping the asteroid. So he's going to have to follow the steps for maneuvering an obstacle again. So this scenario here is about the worst thing that you can do in terms of colliding with an asteroid, because in essence, you're colliding with the same asteroid twice on two subsequent turns. So you want to avoid at all costs the scenario where your nodes for your movement template are overlapping an asteroid, because that means there's no way that you can get around colliding with that asteroid on the next turn. We're going to complicate things further in our last example with Beast here. So he's going to move forward 3 straight, and on the onset, he to have his movement template overlapping the asteroid. It's complicated by the fact that we've got Wedge sitting here. So if Wedge wasn't here, this would be much like our first example, where even though you slide him along the template, his base overlaps the asteroid. If Wedge wasn't here, he'd be sitting like this. Clear asteroid, and with his movement template having overlapped the asteroid. But because Wedge is here, we have to follow the rules for overlapping ships. So we're going to slide Night Beast back. He's doing a little bit further, just in base-to-base contact with Wedge. Now, as a result of having to do that, you can see that Night Beast is now overlapping the asteroid. So he's going to lose his action, and he's going to have to roll a red die and stop the consequences, and he's not going to be able to shoot because his base is overlapping an asteroid. So even though, just looking at his movement template, he was in clear, because he collided with another ship and had to move back, he went up on top of the asteroid. So kind of in the same predicament as Dark Curse is. So he will, like we said, lose his action, not be able to shoot, and has to roll a red die. So those are pretty much scenarios that you'll encounter when you're maneuvering in and around asteroids. As you can see, it's something that you want to avoid at all costs, particularly if your ships are not having any shields. So thanks for watching. I hope this was helpful and informative. And I'll just encourage everyone to, if you don't already, please tune into the X Factor podcast. You find our homepage at xfactorpodcast.com, and there are links there to our RSS feed, our Twitter page, and our Facebook page. Thanks for listening, and stay away of asteroids.